The Thessari Imperial Court operates under legal framework that has governed their society for 8,000 years. Complex system of justice, built on principles of lineage, honor, and collective responsibility, that feels fundamentally alien to species like humans, whose legal traditions focus on individual culpability divorced from family considerations. In Thessari law, responsibility for crimes and consequences for violations are inextricably tied to lineage. When someone commits offense, whether criminal act, civil violation, or breach of professional conduct, the legal proceedings and the resulting sentence consider not just the individual but their entire family context. Heirs who will carry the legacy of the crime. Ancestors whose honor is affected by descendants' actions. The extended family network that shares in both glory and shame according to ancient Thessari concepts of collective reputation. This creates natural checks on criminal behavior. Harming one's family honor through a legal action affects children, grandchildren, future generations, who will bear the mark of ancestors' crime on their family records. Thessari, considering whether to commit offense, must weigh not just personal consequences, but impact on everyone connected to their bloodline. The system also creates mechanisms for mitigation. Family members can advocate for leniency on behalf of convicted relative, can offer restitution from family resources accumulated across generations, can leverage their collective social capital, the honor and standing that family has built over centuries, to negotiate reduced sentences or alternative punishments that preserve family reputation while still serving justice. Sentences are calibrated with explicit consideration of family impact. Judge announcing punishment will reference the convicted person's heirs and how harsh sentence would affect children's futures, will acknowledge appeals from family elders requesting mercy to preserve family honor, will account for the reality that punishing individual reverberates through entire lineage in ways that human legal systems, focused purely on individual responsibility, don't capture. But the system has fundamental gap that its architects never fully addressed. What happens when the accused has no heirs, no family to speak for them, no lineage to consider in sentencing calculations? Childless defendants in Thessari courts face systematic disadvantage. The mitigating factors built into the legal framework, family advocacy, concern for heirs' futures, leverage from collective family honor, simply don't exist for someone without descendants or close relatives. Sentences for childless defendants are typically more severe because there's no lineage consideration to moderate justice with mercy. No appeals from children asking court to consider how parents' imprisonment would affect their lives. No extended family offering resources or social capital to negotiate alternative punishments. Lady Kethara of House Meridian stands accused of industrial sabotage, and she faces the Thessari legal system without the family structure that the system expects every defendant to have. The charges stem from her work at the Atmospheric Processing Facility, Alpha 7, critical infrastructure that maintains breathable atmosphere for Thessari colony on Kepler Station. Kethara worked as senior engineer at the facility, responsible for optimizing the complex chemical processes that extract breathable gases from the station's raw atmospheric composition. The prosecution alleges that Kethara deliberately compromised safety protocols in the processing systems, made technical modifications that degraded redundant safety measures, creating conditions where single-point failures could cascade into catastrophic atmospheric contamination, affecting thousands of station residents. The alleged motive. Kethara held financial interest in competing atmospheric processing facility on the station, and sabotaging facility Alpha 7's operations would drive contracts and revenue toward the competing operation where she stood to profit. The evidence is technical and ambiguous. Kethara admits making modifications to the processing systems. She claims they were optimization improvements, legitimate engineering innovations designed to increase efficiency while maintaining safety margins. She argues that the investigating officials misinterpreted her work because they're unfamiliar with the advanced techniques she was implementing. Expert testimony conflicts. Some engineers support the prosecution's claim that Kethara's modifications compromise safety. Others argue that her innovations were sound engineering that officials are mischaracterizing because they don't understand the sophisticated approaches involved. Under different circumstances, with different defendant, this ambiguity might create reasonable doubt, might lead to acquittal or at minimum to sentence that accounts for uncertainty about intent and impact. But Kethara's circumstances are not favorable. She's childless, never married, her parents are deceased, she has no siblings. Her extended family consists of distant cousins she hasn't spoken to in years and who have not appeared to advocate for her during the trial. In Thessari legal system built on lineage, she stands isolated. No heirs whose futures would be damaged by harsh sentence. No family honor to leverage in negotiations. No relatives making impassioned appeals for mercy. The prosecution emphasizes this repeatedly, not as character attack precisely, but as statement of legal fact relevant to sentencing considerations. The accused has no descendants who would bear the consequences of this conviction, no family to provide accountability or advocate for alternative punishment, no lineage considerations that would moderate the sentence this court imposes. Advocate Sarath, representing Kethara's defense, does her best within the constraints of the system, argues that the technical evidence doesn't support sabotage allegations, that Kethara's engineering modifications were legitimate professional judgment, that conviction based on ambiguous evidence would be miscarriage of justice, but Sarath is working with limited tools. In Thessari court, defense strategy typically involves extensive family testimony, relatives speaking to defendant's character, offering restitution from family resources, negotiating sentences that preserve family honor while acknowledging wrongdoing. Sarath has none of that, just technical arguments about engineering practices and legal arguments about burden of proof. Important arguments, but lacking the family-based leverage that Thessari justice expects. Dr. Marcus Webb has been attending the trial as observer. He's human engineer assigned to Kepler Station through Alliance Technology Exchange Program, and he worked at Atmospheric Processing Facility Alpha 7 alongside Kethara for 2 years before the alleged sabotage was discovered. He believes Kethara is innocent, believes her technical modifications were exactly what she claims, optimization improvements that investigating officials misunderstood. He worked with her on several of those modifications, and he recognized then that her engineering approaches were innovative in ways that conservative facility management might misinterpret as reckless. But Marcus has no standing in these proceedings. He's not family member, not Thessari legal expert, not someone whose testimony carries weight in system designed around lineage and honor. He's testified as technical expert witness, explaining the engineering context of Kethara's work. His testimony was received respectfully, but didn't carry the influence that family advocacy would have. Expert opinion about technical matters versus family appeals for mercy. The latter holds more sway in Thessari courts than the former. Marcus has watched the trial proceed with growing frustration, not with the judge's competence or with procedural fairness. The tribunal is conducting rigorous examination of evidence, but with the structural reality that Kethara faces system that expects her to have family leverage she doesn't possess. Now the trial is concluding. The tribunal has reached its verdict. The verdict reading follows Thessari ceremonial procedures that Marcus has learned to recognize after attending multiple weeks of proceedings. High Magistrate Vethros occupying the elevated judgment seat, flanked by 2 associate magistrates who conferred on the verdict, but who defer to Vethros for formal announcement. Lady Kethara of House Meridian. Vethros intones with the formal gravity that Thessari legal tradition requires. This tribunal has deliberated on the charges of industrial sabotage brought against you by the Kepler Station Authority. We have considered the technical evidence presented by the prosecution and by your defense. We have weighed the expert testimony about the nature of your modifications to Atmospheric Processing Facility Alpha 7's safety systems. The tribunal finds the evidence sufficient to establish that your modifications created conditions where system failures could cascade in ways that endangered station population. While we acknowledge uncertainty about your intent, whether you acted with deliberate sabotage motive or with misguided confidence in engineering innovations that proved unsafe. We find that your professional duty as senior engineer required more conservative approach to safety-critical systems. The tribunal's verdict: guilty of industrial sabotage through reckless modification of safety-critical infrastructure. The words land with finality. Kethara's skin shows controlled silver, the Thessari color indicating emotional restraint over what Marcus recognizes must be devastating fear and disappointment. She stands at attention, maintaining the dignity that Thessari culture expects even when receiving catastrophic news. Advocate Sarath's skin shows frustrated purple, but she doesn't protest the verdict. The evidence was ambiguous enough that guilty finding, while disappointing, isn't shocking violation of legal standards. Vethros continues. We proceed now to sentencing considerations. Thessari law requires that punishment account for impact on defendant's lineage, consideration of family honor, and opportunities for family-based restitution and accountability. What follows is recitation that makes Marcus increasingly angry despite his attempts to maintain professional observer composure. The tribunal notes that Lady Kethara has no descendants, no heirs who would be affected by harsh sentence, no children whose futures would be compromised by parents' criminal record. This absence removes primary mitigating factor that Thessari sentencing framework normally considers. The tribunal notes that Lady Kethara has no living parents, no siblings, no close relatives who have advocated on her behalf or offered family resources toward restitution. This absence removes the family accountability structures that normally provide alternatives to imprisonment. The tribunal notes that Lady Kethara's extended family, distant cousins with whom she has minimal relationship, have not appeared to speak for her or to leverage family honor in requesting mercy. This absence suggests that even her peripheral family connections provide no social capital relevant to sentencing. Vethros pauses, his expression showing what Marcus interprets as regret about what he's required to say next. In cases involving defendants without lineage considerations, Thessari law permits, and in some circumstances requires, sentences of greater severity than would be imposed on defendants with family to account for. The logic is that absence of heirs removes natural deterrent effect, and that lack of family advocacy suggests defendants' isolation from the social bonds that normally constrain behavior. Lady Kethara, this tribunal sentences you to 15 years imprisonment in secure facility, with no eligibility for early release. You will additionally be required to provide full financial restitution to Atmospheric Processing Facility, Alpha 7, for costs incurred in reversing your modifications and implementing enhanced safety protocols. Your engineering credentials will be permanently revoked, prohibiting future work in safety-critical systems across Alliance territories. 15 years, Marcus processes the severity with shock. For ambiguous evidence where intent was uncertain, and where no actual harm occurred, because the modifications were discovered during routine inspection before any failures happened. He knows from following Thessari legal precedent that defendants with families typically receive significantly lighter sentences for similar offenses. Perhaps 3 to 5 years with possibility of early release if family provides accountability monitoring. Perhaps alternative sentences involving supervised community service if family offers restitution. But Kethara has no family to offer those alternatives, so she faces the harsh end of the sentencing range with no mitigation. Vethros prepares to bring down the ceremonial gavel that will finalize the sentence. Ancient Thessari tradition, where physical striking of gavel marks the moment when judgment becomes irreversible legal reality. Marcus realizes with sudden clarity that he has perhaps 30 seconds before the gavel falls and the sentence becomes fixed. He stands from his position in the observer section. His voice carries clearly through the courtroom's acoustics, stopping Vethros with the gavel raised but not yet descended. Magistrate Vethros, I invoke the Doctrine of Transferred Responsibility under Thessari Legal Code Section 7443. The effect is immediate and dramatic. Every Thessari in the courtroom, judges, prosecution, defense counsel, observers, showing skin colors that indicate profound shock. Stunned white, confused purple, processing what they just heard. The doctrine of transferred responsibility is ancient legal principle, codified in the earliest Thessari law codes, but rarely invoked in modern times. Marcus spent the last 3 nights studying it after recognizing that Kethara's trial was heading toward harsh sentence due to her lack of family leverage. The doctrine allows someone to voluntarily claim responsibility for another person's crime, to accept the full legal consequences as though they had committed the act themselves, to transfer culpability from the originally accused to the person making the claim. It exists because Thessari culture recognizes that in collaborative work, engineering projects, military operations, complex professional endeavors, determining sole culpability is sometimes impossible. Multiple people contribute to outcomes. Sometimes the person technically responsible isn't the person whose decisions primarily caused the problem. The doctrine allows honor-bound individuals to claim responsibility when they believe they bear greater moral culpability than the person formally accused, or when they believe that accepting consequences themselves better serves justice than allowing sentence to fall on someone less equipped to bear it. But invoking the doctrine is extraordinary commitment. You can't partially transfer responsibility. Can't share consequences between original defendant and the person claiming culpability. Either you fully accept the crime and its sentence, or you don't invoke the doctrine at all. Magistrate Vethros stares at Marcus with expression combining shock, confusion, and growing understanding of what the human engineer just did. Dr. Webb, Vethros says carefully, the doctrine of transferred responsibility requires that you accept full legal culpability for the industrial sabotage charge, that you claim, under oath and subject to perjury penalties, that you, not Lady Kethara, performed the technical modifications that compromised atmospheric processing facility Alpha 7's safety protocols. Are you certain you understand what you're invoking? I understand completely, Magistrate, Marcus responds. His voice is steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I'm claiming that the technical modifications to the atmospheric processing systems were my work, performed under my engineering judgment, and that the courtroom erupts in controlled chaos. Not open disruption, Thessari legal decorum prevents that, but intense whispered conversations among observers, rapid skin color shifts indicating shock and confusion, the ambient sound of hundreds of beings processing something unprecedented. Ambassador Chen, representing human diplomatic interests and sitting in the diplomatic observer section, shows alarm. He stands partially as though to object to what Marcus is doing, then sits back down with expression suggesting he's recognized that intervention would be counterproductive. Advocate Sarath shows complex skin colors, surprised white mixing with hopeful gold mixing with concerned purple. She didn't coordinate this with Marcus, had no idea he was planning to invoke the doctrine. She's processing whether his intervention helps or complicates her defense of Kethara. Kethara herself turns to look at Marcus directly for the first time since he spoke. Her skin shows shocked white transitioning to something Marcus can't interpret, but that looks like it might be gratitude mixed with horror at what he's claiming to do. Vethros calls for order. The courtroom quiets, though the tension remains palpable. Dr. Webb, the tribunal must examine your claim carefully. The doctrine of transferred responsibility is legal mechanism with ancient precedent, but its invocation requires that the person claiming responsibility could plausibly have committed the act in question. You worked at Atmospheric Processing Facility Alpha 7 alongside Lady Kethara, Vethros continues, reviewing information that court records provide. You collaborated on multiple engineering projects. You had access to the systems that were modified. So technical plausibility exists, you could theoretically have made the modifications you're claiming to have made. But the tribunal must also assess whether your claim is genuine acceptance of responsibility, or whether it's strategic invocation designed to exploit the doctrine's provisions. Dr. Webb, did you actually make the technical modifications to the safety systems? Or are you claiming responsibility to protect Lady Kethara from sentence? The question is direct challenge. Thessari law doesn't require that person claiming transferred responsibility prove they committed the act. The doctrine exists precisely for situations where proof is impossible, or where collaborative work makes sole culpability unclear. but it does require that the claim be made in good faith rather than as transparent legal fiction. Marcus meets Vethros's gaze steadily. Magistrate, Lady Kethara and I worked together on optimization projects for 18 months. We collaborated so extensively that determining which specific technical decisions originated with her versus with me is genuinely impossible. The modifications that investigating officials classified as safety compromises were implemented during period when both of us had access to the systems and both of us were proposing innovations. I'm claiming responsibility because I believe my engineering judgment contributed to those modifications as much as Lady Kethara's did. Because I advocated for the optimization approaches that officials are now calling reckless. Because if those modifications were errors, and I still contend they weren't, then I share culpability for implementing them. It's carefully phrased, not quite claiming that he personally made the specific modifications, not quite admitting that he's invoking the doctrine strategically to protect Kethara, walking the line between good faith responsibility claim and protective legal maneuver. Vethros studies Marcus for long moment. Then, Dr. Webb, you understand that accepting transferred responsibility means you would face the full sentence that was about to be imposed on Lady Kethara? 15 years imprisonment, financial restitution, permanent revocation of engineering credentials. These consequences would fall to you rather than to her. I understand, Marcus confirms. You also understand that unlike Lady Kethara, you have family, Vethros continues. The tribunal's research indicates you have 2 adult children, extended family network. All the lineage considerations that Thessari's sentencing framework accounts for. By claiming responsibility, you're not just accepting punishment, you're transforming the sentencing calculation entirely. And that, Marcus knows, is exactly the point. By claiming responsibility, he shifts the case from punishing childless woman whose isolation removes mitigating factors to punishing someone whose family will bear the legacy of conviction, someone whose heirs will carry the mark of their father's criminal record, someone whose extended family network creates exactly the kind of leverage and advocacy that the Thessari legal system expects. Vethros recognizes it too. His skin shows thoughtful blue mixed with what might be respect or might be frustration at being maneuvered by clever invocation of ancient doctrine. Dr. Webb, the tribunal must consider whether to accept your claim of transferred responsibility. We will recess to deliberate. You will remain available for additional questioning if needed. During the recess, Ambassador Chen approaches Marcus in the corridor outside the courtroom. Dr. Webb, what you just did is either remarkably brave or spectacularly foolish. Possibly both. Do you understand that you might actually end up serving 15 years in Thessari prison if the tribunal accepts your claim? I understand, Marcus says, but I also understand that Kethara was about to receive harsh sentence purely because she lacks family to advocate for her. The legal principle might be ancient Thessari tradition, but the injustice of punishing someone more severely because they're alone, that's wrong regardless of cultural context. So you're gambling that the tribunal won't actually sentence you to 15 years because you have family and she doesn't, Chen observes. That by claiming responsibility, you force them to apply the mitigating factors they were denying her. It's not just gambling, Marcus replies. The doctrine of transferred responsibility exists because Thessari culture recognizes that sometimes accepting consequences to protect others is honorable choice. I'm using their own legal framework to demonstrate that she shouldn't be punished more harshly just for being alone. Kethara approaches, accompanied by Advocate Serath. Her skin shows complex colors Marcus is still learning to read. Dr. Webb, you didn't have to do this. The sentence was mine to bear. You're risking your freedom, your career, your family's honor for someone you barely know. I know you well enough, Marcus says. Worked with you for 2 years. Saw your engineering judgment firsthand. Believe you're innocent of sabotage and that this conviction is based on officials misunderstanding innovative work. If claiming responsibility means the tribunal has to consider family factors that change the sentencing calculation, then that's justice working the way it should. The recess ends. The tribunal reconvenes. Vethros announces their decision. The tribunal accepts Dr. Webb's claim of transferred responsibility under the doctrine. We find that collaborative nature of the engineering work makes individual culpability appropriately subject to voluntary claims of responsibility. Dr. Webb's assertion that he bears culpability for the technical modifications is legally sufficient under the doctrine's provisions. Therefore, the charges against Lady Kethara are dismissed. The conviction and sentence announced earlier are voided. Dr. Marcus Webb is now the defendant in this case, charged with industrial sabotage through his claimed responsibility for the modifications to atmospheric processing facility Alpha 7. The gavel comes down, making the transfer official. What follows is rapid recalibration of the sentencing phase, same crime, same evidence, but completely different defendant with completely different family considerations. Vethros addresses Marcus directly. Dr. Webb, the tribunal must now consider appropriate sentence for the industrial sabotage conviction you have claimed. Unlike the previous defendant, you have substantial family to account for in sentencing calculations. The tribunal's research indicates you have 2 adult children, daughter Sarah, age 28, working as medical researcher. Son James, age 25, serving in Alliance military forces. Both have established careers and reputations that would be affected by their father's criminal conviction. You have elderly mother who depends on you for financial support. You have extended family network including siblings, nieces, nephews. These family considerations create mitigating factors that Thessari law requires us to account for. Your children's futures would be compromised by harsh sentence against their father. Your mother's welfare would be threatened by your imprisonment. Your extended family's honor would be affected by your conviction. Additionally, your family has been contacted by court officials during the recess, as is standard procedure when transferred responsibility doctrine is invoked, and several family members have submitted rapid appeals requesting leniency. Your daughter argues that imprisonment would prevent you from supporting your mother's medical care. Your brother offers to provide financial restitution on your behalf from family resources. These are exactly the kinds of family interventions that Thessari sentencing framework is designed to accommodate. Vethros pauses. The tribunal also notes that unlike Lady Kethara, whose isolation from family suggested someone operating outside normal social accountability structures, you are deeply embedded in family relationships that provide ongoing oversight and deterrent effects. Your family will monitor your conduct. Your concern for their welfare and reputation will constrain future behavior. These factors reduce need for harsh punitive measures. Therefore, Dr. Marcus Webb, this tribunal sentences you to 3 years supervised probation rather than imprisonment. You will maintain employment in engineering capacity subject to court oversight. You will provide financial restitution to atmospheric processing facility Alpha 7 in amount of 50,000 Alliance credits, a sum your brother has indicated your family can provide. You will make public acknowledgement of responsibility for the safety protocol modifications and their problematic nature. Your engineering credentials will be suspended for 3 years, but may be reinstated upon successful completion of probation. 3 years supervised probation. No imprisonment. Restitution amount that's significant but manageable with family help. Credential suspension rather than permanent revocation. Dramatically lighter than the 15-year imprisonment sentence that was about to fall on Kethara for the exact same conviction. The courtroom observers process the disparity with varying reactions, some showing approving gold, recognition that the human engineer successfully invoked ancient doctrine to protect someone the system had abandoned. Some showing frustrated purple, awareness that legal manipulation just occurred even if it was technically legitimate. Some showing thoughtful blue, processing the implications about how Thessari justice treats those with versus without family. Vethros brings the gavel down, finalizing the sentence. Then he does something unusual. He addresses Marcus directly in a way that goes beyond formal legal requirements. Dr. Webb, this tribunal recognizes what you did here. You invoked the doctrine of transferred responsibility, knowing that doing so would transform the sentencing calculation entirely. You claimed culpability to activate family considerations that the original defendant couldn't access. You used the Thessari legal framework to demonstrate that sentencing someone more harshly purely, because they lack family advocacy, is unjust outcome even when it's legally permissible. The doctrine exists because our culture values honor and recognizes that sometimes accepting consequences to protect others is worthy choice. You have honored that tradition while also revealing its limitations. That system built on lineage considerations creates systematic disadvantage for those without family. The tribunal cannot change 8,000 years of legal tradition based on single case. But we acknowledge that your intervention has demonstrated gap in our justice that deserves consideration for future reform. Thank you for your courage in standing in path of consequence when no one else was left to speak for Lady Kethara. After the session concludes and the courtroom begins clearing, Kethara approaches Marcus. Her skin shows complex emotional colors: grateful gold, guilty purple, uncertain blue. "You sacrificed your freedom and risked your career to protect me," she says quietly. "Accepted conviction and sentence that should have been mine. I don't know how to express adequate gratitude for that kind of solidarity." "You shouldn't have faced harsher sentence just because you don't have family," Marcus replies. "The engineering work was collaborative. I genuinely did contribute to the modifications they're calling sabotage. If claiming responsibility activated family considerations that changed the outcome, that's the system working the way it should." "But you'll carry conviction on your record now," Kethara observes. 3 years probation, public acknowledgement of responsibility, your family involved in restitution. Those aren't trivial consequences, even if they're lighter than imprisonment. "They're consequences I can bear," Marcus says, "and bearing them means you're free. That's worth the cost." "Why?" Kethara asks. "Why take this risk for someone you barely know? You could have testified as expert witness and left the outcome to the legal system. Instead, you stood in path of judgment and claimed responsibility when you could have stayed safe in observer section." Marcus considers his answer carefully. "Because I watched your trial proceed, and I recognized that you were being systematically disadvantaged by framework that expects everyone to have family leverage. Because I have family and you don't, and that difference was about to result in drastically different punishment for the same alleged crime. Because solidarity means standing with people when the system abandons them, and claiming responsibility was the most powerful way I could demonstrate that solidarity." He pauses. "And because I genuinely believe you're innocent of sabotage, that your engineering work was innovative and that conservative officials mischaracterized it as reckless. So accepting responsibility wasn't pure legal fiction. It was acknowledging that if there were errors in those modifications, I share culpability for implementing them alongside you." Kethara's skin shows warm gold. "You gave me freedom I thought I'd lost. Used your family, your children, your mother, your extended network, as legal leverage to protect stranger. That's extraordinary generosity." "It's accountability," Marcus corrects gently, "choosing to stand in path of consequence. Using whatever advantages the system gave me, family, social capital, legal knowledge, to upend rigid framework that was producing unjust outcome. Not generosity, just recognition that sometimes claiming responsibility for someone else is the right thing to do when no one else is left to speak." 3 years later, Marcus completes his probation successfully. His engineering credentials are reinstated. His family's restitution payments are fulfilled. The conviction remains on his record, but doesn't prevent him from continuing to work in his field. Kethara establishes successful engineering consulting practice. She and Marcus occasionally collaborate on projects. The bond formed when he stepped forward to claim her responsibility